on behalf of CEC, EduSat program. Today we have with us a distinguished guest, Rajiv Malhotra, who has written a recent book. His recent book is titled as Being Different, an Indian Challenge to Western Universalism. Rajiv, by training, has been a scientist, but he has opted out from science and decided to talk of philosophy. And particularly his concern is the way Indian philosophy and Hinduism is being seen in the Western countries and in the Western universities. He has a very critical approach to the kind of discussion that takes place on Indian traditions. We also have today with us Professor P.K. Pandey from Jawaharlal Nehru University, Dr. S.K. Shukla, Shashank Chaturvedi, and Ruchi. So I'll request Rajiv to first 10 to 15 minutes introduce his main idea, then we'll come back with questions.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me. I'm delighted to be here. I've been on a month-long trip to introduce this book across different places in India. This book is basically trying to ask the question or address the question, how is Indianness or Indian civilization or Indian culture or Indian mental makeup different from the West? Not different in the sense of superior or inferior, but different just as different. It could be some areas of difference are better, some are worse. And the cover of the book is the Samudra Manthan, the opposite forces churning. So it symbolizes the fact that I've done a lot of churning with Westerners of various kinds, with Catholics, Protestants, secularists, atheists, scientists, and over the last few decades I've been doing this churning in order to understand where this difference is centered. I've also done a lot of similar Samudra Manthan internally with Buddhist scholars and with Shaivites and with Sri Aurobindo scholars and Marxists and atheists and so on over the years. So as a result of that, I've come up with what I consider to be four differences that meet the criteria that among the diverse range of Indian systems, these four are fairly common positions, and yet they are very different from the way the Westerners see things. So the first of the four, I'm not putting them in the same sequence as the book. One difference that struck me was the attitude towards what Westerners call chaos. Westerners have a tendency to be very linear, very organized system of control. The whole thinking is like that. And what occurred to me is that, when I would conduct meetings, and there were some Indians and some Westerners, the Indians are always having many conversations. So A is talking to B, C is talking to D, and E is talking to A and B, and somebody is listening and interjecting here and there. And the Westerners are sort of not used to this. So they would sit quietly. And then after a while, when the meeting was over, the Indians would say they know what to do now, we figured it out. Because they had filtered out many parallel things happening, a lot of multitasking going on. But the Westerners would come and ask, what happened, we don't know what happened, it's all chaos, a lot of, So one has to do things in a more linear way for Westerners. And I found that a lot of Western writing describes this as a problem Indians have, that unpredictability, they're ambiguous. Now the Indian would say this is a quality, because the Indian chef doesn't say that you take so many ounces and put it to so many degrees for so many minutes. He kind of does it by feel, And the Indian dancer improvises. The rag player never wants to perform the same way twice, even the same rag, he improvises. So this idea of complexity is inherent, very complex. Whereas in the West, that seems too bewildering to them. It overwhelms their cognitive capacity, the cognitive bandwidth. So they call it chaos. So a lot of descriptions of India and Indian civilization in the West seem to give that characteristic of chaos. So I thought that's an important difference that should be pointed out. Now, it's not always good to have such a lot of comfort with the disorder. It can also make people, get away with things by saying, we are just chaos, So it can also lead to corruption maybe, because people think I'm improvising routes, I'm making my own routes kind of. So I'm not saying that a comfort with uh, disorder, chaos is necessarily positive or negative, but it's a point of difference. It ought to be recognized. Then another very serious difference I have between Indian and Western ways of thinking is the attitude towards history. And this starts with the Judeo-Christian tradition, but then in the Enlightenment it continues as, without reference to God per se, the whole Hegel, legacy of linear history and civilizations ranked according to where they are on this linear scale, and the West is always ahead, and things of that sort. And I problematize that, I criticize that quite a bit. This obsession with history as their sense of who they are, and therefore protection of that history and projection of that history. And others are welcome to join, but in their history, join by becoming members of their history. So a lot of Indians may think that they are doing well, but inadvertently they may be joining a Western sense of history for themselves also. Whereas in our culture, itihas is not the same as history. I make a point of this because itihas is very flexible. Itihas is not an exclusive claim. So whatever itihas you believe in, you have no reason to doubt that somebody from another culture says that they had a different experience, they had a different past. Whereas historicity in Judeo-Christianity has to be very exclusive. So that has to do with their metaphysics. I explain why the nature of the problem that they're trying to solve requires an exclusivity and linear history. So this linear history becomes a box trap, and you cannot resolve conflicts which have been created once they are historically absolute. So, for instance, the conflict between Christianity and Islam, because both have huge historical emphasis, some of those conflicts cannot be created, cannot be solved, because a claim by one is contradicting the other. So one or the other has to concede, and the moment they concede, they lost their whole, structure. So I've been asked sometimes to mediate or moderate debates between the Abrahamic religions, as a person whose contribution is that you have to become less historical and maybe look at the principles of your exemplars rather than the historical details. And then another point of difference I mention is non-translatables. That and I use Sanskrit, but you could apply it to Tamil, you could apply it to various languages, that certain words are not translatable. I give about 20-25 examples in this book, but you can extend it. So even while using English, I would say that you cannot, for instance, translate dharma as religion. You cannot, and there's a lot of words like that. So by preserving the most important concepts of a language, the most important, you preserve the tradition. And the alternative is what I use the term digestion. Digestion is, I define digestion as one civilization getting digested into another. So the one that is the predator, so a tiger eats a goat, and there is no more goat DNA left inside the tiger, because tiger cannot even have one molecule of goat DNA. It is toxic. So the goat DNA has to be broken down into little parts, and then inside the tiger reassembled as tiger's DNA. And the goat is disappeared. There's no goat left. So civilizations which get mapped into the Western framework, into the Western universalism, language gets replaced by the Western substitutes, even though they are not exactly the same experience, but something similar. And behavior patterns get sort of replaced by Western equivalents, though they are getting digested. And I feel that Indian Sanskriti is getting digested as we speak. This is my feeling, that it's getting digested. And there is a history of such digestions. After all, a lot of these so-called pagan traditions from Native Americans, Africans, Europeans themselves got digested. Some of their useful things were assimilated. A lot of useful things were actually from other people. But those people, their civilizations disappeared. They're sitting in a museum. So this is what happens to a digested civilization. What's useful about you is recharacterized as property of the West. They come up with their own history of that. And what is not useful is sort of, that's how you're characterized. So I feel that's happening. And a resistance to being digested is to be different. To understand where we resist digestion by saying, but we are like this. We are not saying that we are better or worse, but we are like this. And we have no problem being that way. So that was what led me to write this book.
Okay, so one of the things that I think viewers today would like to know, what is the implication of this theory that you are trying to propose on the idea of democracy, and how the new generation should work on themselves to live in a society which is multicultural? If this kind of difference is too much emphasized, is it that there will be a permanent sense of alienation and the communities fragmentation, and communities will not be able to live together?
Yes. See, I feel, and this is a very important point I've searched, because I'm certainly looking for unity of the Indian civilization rather than fragmentation. And I feel that within our tradition, it's a kind of open architecture. For a long time, we've had an open architecture where people of all kinds have come, the Zoroastrians have come, the early Christians have come, Muslims have come and become very Indianized, and, they're Indian, not like Arabs anymore, or whatever, or any other culture, but Indians. So there is something in the quality, in the civilizational foundation, which has allowed so much diversity, and you will not find this diversity anywhere else. So that has to be preserved in a democracy. The unfortunate thing is when that turns into vote banks, and those vote banks have to fight each other, be made to fight each other, because the person who's in charge of a vote bank wants to say they are your enemies, I'll protect you, and that creates tensions. So the diversity, the beauty of the diversity, it can be turned around into a liability in the hands of irresponsible politicians. So that's my feeling about how a democracy could go either way.
Yeah, before I come to Professor Pandey, I just want to, I'm reminded of Gandhi, who thought that this kind of competitive democracy is not a good model for Indian society. Instead of that, there should be an oceanic circle of representation, so that at the top you have a small group and there's a wide base, but every group, cultural group, is represented in that, or professional group is represented in that. Probably that model would be a better model.
Yeah, so that way my group is represented and I don't have to knock down someone else, because I have a seat at the table. I have a seat at the table without saying that I have to knock this guy out and show that he's no good and so on. So this is actually an interesting idea. This is very consistent. I mean, I quote Gandhi quite a lot in this and have been inspired by him over the years. And I would say that if you look at American democracies, there is no party viable beyond two. It's a binary choice. This is how it is. But in India, it's not like that. This is part of that chaos, part of that huge complexity that is not like simple yes, no binary choices. So how to preserve this in a way that there's harmony among them and they don't feel that they're competing. Now, some of the jatis, I went and lived with the fishermen in Nagapattinam after the tsunami. I went and lived there. So I found that it's very interesting. This jati of fishermen, they'll fish a certain kind of fish, and they have a gentleman's understanding. The other jati fish different kind of fish. So that determines the boat you make and how many kilometers far into the ocean it will go, because certain kind of fish is found there. And the other one have a different kind of boat, different kind of nets, and their fishing technique is different, and they will not mess with each other's, non-competitive. So it's very, very interesting that these jatis worked out a system of cooperation rather than competition.
Professor Pandey, I'd like to raise some.
Thank you. I've really enjoyed going through your book. Something that deeply concerns and interests me. I would like to ask you something in relation to the using the epithet complex, let's say complexity, for the Indian system. I thought, can we develop some kind of an understanding of how this is, what this has come to be?
Yes.
In the sense that I remember A.K. Ramanujan talking about the difference.
I quote him a lot here. Yeah. A.K. Ramanujan is one of my favorite guys. I quote him a lot here.
Yes. Is there?
I know he's controversial, but I support A.K. Ramanujan.
I see. So this context, that is, truth is context sensitive,
Yes.
context dependent.
Yes,
There's
absolutely.
nothing like absolute truth.
And that is what dharma is. It
Yes.
is, dharma is context sensitive,
Mm.
and the ultimate dharma is swadharma, which I discovered for myself, my calling. And so the last dharma of last resort is the sadharan dharma, which is the universal few codes and all that. So I fully support this A.K. Ramanujan's idea. But you know what I explain in this book is what I explain in this book is the metaphysical and philosophical base for so much complexity. See, and I had to convince Buddhists, bring them in, and they came in. But I started with the idea of Brahman, that one becomes everything, so that complexity is not a problem to be solved, because you see it as the one which is pervading not only in the insects and plants, and within each plant there is variety, many kinds of roses, and within animals there are dogs, many kind of dogs, variety of them. And so there's varieties within varieties within varieties. But there is no fear of chaos, because we know that no matter how much chaos or how much uncertainty and diversity there may be, there is the one holding everything. So therefore I'm relaxed about it. I can handle everything, no matter how bewildering it may be, because I am very secure that ultimately it is all one. This is a very profound. Whereas the Western idea is what I call a synthetic unity. The Indian idea I call integral unity, which is the one permeating as everything else, the one becoming many. In the Western idea, the starting point in Aristotle is that there exist atomic entities that have separate essences. And the agenda of the philosopher is to figure out how they become collective entities. So there is always the fear that they may fall apart. The individual entities, because they are the ultimate essences, they are being held together, and we have to always work to keep them together. So there is this pressure towards order. Order is a kind of fixation to bring diverse entities together, and a fear of chaos is that they may fall apart. So this does not exist because of the metaphysics of India. This is the Hindu side. Buddhists do not believe in Brahman, but Buddhists believe in mutual codependence and lack of ultimate essences. There is no ultimate essences. So what exists is everything in mutual codependence, in a network of codependence. So that is their unity. That comprises the unity. So I would say that there is definitely philosophical and classical reasons for comfort with diversity, comfort with chaos, and we should understand this distinction vis-a-vis the West.
And therefore, we don't believe in the melting pot kind of idea to put all the cultures together and meld them to become similar culture. Right?
Yes.
That's one of the reasons that we.
Yes, and while the caste system has many problems, and it is maybe become distorted or become outlived its purpose, and there have to be, there can be a whole discussion, and probably there should be, on pros and cons and what to do and so on. But one of the reasons the diversity got preserved is because of the jati structure. And the jati would say, this is my jati, we do this thing, and somebody else has arrived from somewhere and they got this land and they are doing their thing, we mind each other's business. Suppose the Europeans who went to the Americas respected the Native Americans as another jati, then they would not have a need to genocide them. But this idea that we are the universal, and there's some kind of anxiety that they're different. So we got to either make them like us. They tried for 50 years, 75 years, they failed. They couldn't make them into, organized people living in settlements. So they had to ultimately be genocided. So I think there is a mixed bag. It's a mixed side, the mixed idea. The jati structure is a mixed, positive things to it and negative things to it.
One more question I would like to ask you concerning the impact of the Western way of thinking on our cultures. Once the fact that almost everything we are doing today in higher education is influenced by the Western mode of doing academics. One of the consequences that I have noticed is that we have to live with the conflicts and tensions in approaches that have come to us from the West, and which we cannot rationalize. For example, you look at any discipline whatsoever, and we always find that there is some kind of a competition or a contention between two different things.
Mm.
So if you do psychology, for example, you do either behaviorist or
Yes.
cognitivist.
Yes.
In my own field, linguistics, you either do something to do with social communication,
Yes.
or you do with the mind, brain, etc.
Yes.
The difficulty is that often you have to choose between them.
Mhm.
What I understand is that in the Indian way, we don't have to have a
Correct.
choice between
That's correct.
them.
That's correct.
We can allow for both,
Correct.
actually, and integration is what we see.
Correct.
And
So
so
the-
often we are
Yeah.
lost.
So the chapter 3, I believe, is called Integral Unity and Synthetic Unity. And that is what it deals with. It deals with the Indian idea as integral unity. So there is a integral unity. So for example, dance, Indian classical dance is also a grammar which has got the metaphysics and philosophy in it. And Indian music mirrors. So these are not separate disciplines that emerged separately and we somehow trying to synthesize them and bring them together. So the grammar includes philosophy. So the idea of understanding reality, understanding humanity, has evolved and emerged out of a very deep, unified concept. So it is not only the idea of Brahman or codependent, mutual codependent network, as Buddhists would call it. Is not only that integral idea, but also the humanities are very integrated. In the classical Indian humanities are very integrated. So this is a serious problem. When a synthetic mind, which is how I describe the Western mind, captures and appropriates and starts studying the integral mind like the Indian, it breaks it up. And that's what you're describing. That we adopt this method and we start getting broken up into pieces and compartments and fighting each other.
Our students, researchers are not able to comprehend this whole thing.
Yeah.
So they have to be, let's say, pursuing research or pursuing knowledge, but often they do not have any understanding of why they have to restrict themselves
Yes.
to one single approach.
Yes, and the
not
reward
for the
system.
other.
The reward system is controlled from somewhere else.
That's
Whether it is journals, foreign trips,
That's true,
yes.
degree you get, conference you're invited to. So the gold standard of who's legitimate within India is who's been legitimized overseas.
That's true.
This is very sad.
That's now the UGC has has brought this more gold standard. which is
Yeah.
much more.
Why isn't it that I saw somebody got the Grammy, so everybody in India is happy. Somebody won this award. Who gives awards has a huge control over what kind of message is to be given. Whether it is literary awards, movie awards, anything.
But then, if I want to counter your
Yeah.
argument, I would like to say that let there be a universal, and there is a universal. Maybe this universal is constructed through a power relationship, but nevertheless, that is accepted as universal at the moment. And what should I do? Should I forget the idea of capturing that universal, or should we create an alternative universal? If I want to create an alternative universal, then do I have the resources to create that? So that's a big dilemma I think we are
So
facing.
I'll tell you what I did in my life. I faced that dilemma. So I said first till age 44, and I thought I've succeeded much earlier, but I was very too optimistic. At age 44, I switched from the first goal to the second goal. So I first pursued trying to beat them at their game, win, create corporate success, create businesses, get into technology, and not have to worry about security and whatnot. And then at the peak of that success, I decided, okay, I really don't want to do that. And people thought he must be joking, but I gave up, and I really never in my heart had turned into that. I was just wanting to do it so that I can get out of it. And then I said, okay, I'll spend the rest of my life, which has been 17 years now, making my own universal. Now I'll make the rules. I'll live by how I feel like. I'm not dependent on anybody. Now this is not always available. So you could argue that India as a nation must do both games. India as a nation has to play by the rules of universalism in order to have GDP, in order to have material resources which have been drained out, in order to have technology, science, innovation, all these great things. But India should also invest a huge amount in preserving its civilization. The way Chinese are not giving up their civilization. The English is being adopted, but only as a second language. They're not shutting down Mandarin. That is their mother tongue. The French are sure that you have to learn French first. The Russians make sure you learn Russian first. Japanese, same way. So we have to create some mechanisms to preserve our civilization, reimagine our civilization, not the colonial version that we have been taught, but what we think of ourselves. This should be an investment in parallel with those industries who are going at high GDP. We need that also. So I would say we need to do both.
We need to do both. I think that's interesting formulation that you are giving.
In my life, I did one and then the other. I could not do both. So I said I'll do one, then quit completely. Absolutely, I don't have one day of work on or one iota of interest or involvement for 17 years in any for-profit activity, professional activity. I'm just full-time scholar in what I call the Indian humanities. But India as a nation can't do one first and then the other, because if you do only the high GDP, and you neglect the other, it may disappear. So we have to do both in parallel.
That I think is an interesting formulation. But as the book has mentioned, the problem in this, the problem is sometimes absolutely irreconcilable. Like your own experience of trying to insert a small concept of respect, mutual respect instead of tolerance.
Yes.
And how you found that it's very difficult to really do both the things together simultaneously.
Yes. So to explain this, I have several things. I use words. I've coined phrases, and so I use these to provoke people. So whenever I ask a person in the United States who's into religious dialogue or interfaith dialogue or a member of a church, because they're very open about their religiosity, unlike in India, religion is out in the public square very visibly. So when I ask them, what is your policy or your position on pluralism, often they say, well, we are tolerant. So I critique the word tolerance. And this is a very common thing. We practice religious tolerance. So I tell them that, would you like your spouse to say that I tolerate you? Or your colleague to say I tolerate you in the office? Or someone to sit there next to you at dinner and say I tolerate you to sit next to me? I mean, it's patronizing. It's a kind of talking down at somebody. It shows that there is something wrong with you and they are putting up with you. So why not mutual respect? And the religious people who come from a very exclusive religion have a hard time giving respect to another one. They can tolerate, because you can tolerate something that is illegitimate. You can tolerate just before tolerating, but you can't respect it, because when you respect it, you've given it authenticity and legitimacy. So this is part of the exclusivity, the linear history, and all those other things. This is true. But when you make a point like that, they are stuck by it. After a while they get it and they realize that there is something they can learn. So this is an example of what an Indian can always do. There's many things of this sort. What an Indian can do by way of explaining his difference. And so many Westerners have written to me after understanding that mutual respect should be the phrase and the idea, not tolerance. So many people have started saying, okay, we ought to think about this.
Shashank has a question. Shashank has worked on politics of knowledge and religion, culture, power. Yes,
Okay.
Shashank.
So in that context only I'm asking this, that historically there is a very obvious presence of dharma in Indian public sphere, while a very deliberate absence of religion in the West, especially in the modern society. Do you think there is a reversal of this trend in the last 2 decades or so, where there is a deliberate attempt to bring in religion in the West, and there is a deliberate attempt to remove dharma from the Indian society, and then there the debate on secularism is coming in India? While if we look at Lisbon Treaty or European Union Charter on Human Rights, we are finding that they are deliberately asking for engaging with the religious institutions, bringing in the public sphere. So how you look at that?
So first of all, I disagree that religion is declining in the West, because I would separate Europe and United States. It is true of Europe, but it is not true of United States. In United States, Christianity is very strong. You look at the autobiography of Jimmy Carter, considered the most liberal president. He says that he's an evangelical, he's a born-again Christian, very proud of that, and he says that most serious decisions during his presidency he made based on his Christian values. Very clear. So much, so when the word secularism merely means in the American context that the institution of church and institution of state shall remain separate. But that doesn't mean that you're not a religious person. Similarly, Bill Clinton, in his 800-page autobiography, 200 pages are on his upbringing as a Southern Baptist. And Hillary Clinton, when she was a senator, was a member of a Christian prayer group that senators and congressmen who wanted to meet for prayer together. And a lot of things were written that this is her skill to network using Christianity as a networking tool to win over people from both sides. So the religion is a very strong force in the United States.
So that's why I'm asking that. I was saying that till now, till last 2 decades, there was an attempt to put religion in the backstage.
But not in the United States. But in Europe, yes.
That's why I use the term public sphere. But
Yes.
in last 2 decades, it seems that there is
It's
a
coming
reversal
back
of
in the public
trend.
sphere.
Yes.
Yeah, I would say in United States, Reagan, Nixon era, I mean, they were always very religious people. If you look back in the Cold War, they were very religious people. So United States has a pendulum that goes back and forth on this matter, but the center of power has never shifted out of the control of the Christianity. There is, of course, the fringe extreme right, and then there is the middle of the ground right, and the liberal Christians are different, but they are not in power. That's not where the power strength structure is. Europe, you're right. Europe, it's a very recent phenomenon, and it is large part of it is U.S. churches and European churches getting together, and they are creating so many international forums which are religious oriented, and they're seeing that we should recognize religion as a force. And you see, meanwhile, because we are copycat, humanities, Indian social sciences and humanities assume that we should stop talking about religion. It's a matter for primitive, backward people. So we do not have religious studies in Indian universities.
That's true.
So when you are going to discuss Indian religions, you will find Western expert know more about it, because we have not produced PhDs and professors and all kinds of people in religious studies. The American Academy of Religion, which has scholars of religion, has about 13,000-14,000 members.
That's true.
In addition, there is American Society of Bible Studies, which is more strict, the equal number, who are more particularly Christian only. So the academic discourse of religion is huge in the United States. Every college or university has a religious studies program, and very large number of students are in it. So because we left a vacuum, so the vacuum is often filled by irresponsible politicians who can exploit. Because we haven't been taught what are the basic tenets of all religions in a respectful way. I would like that to be the case, that the youth are taught that not with a bias, but here is what this person's claim is, their religious claim, this is their religious claim, and this is their religious claim, and so on.
So respect everybody.
To respect everybody based on authentic knowledge of what everybody's claim is. And that way they would be less vulnerable to manipulation by politicians like we are having today.
You have mentioned, before I come to Professor Pandey, you have mentioned in your book that Sanskrit protects dharma from digestion. How do you think this is true? What is your argument there?
Well, I'm saying that there are certain words in Sanskrit. There are certain words in Sanskrit that are non-translatable. And similarly, Tamil you could apply the same to any language. I would say that preserving some Arabic word which is so specific to their way of life and their way of thinking that you don't find it in another language, and insisting that this is the word we're going to use, we're not going to come up with some English substitute. Make sure that it is kept, that idea is kept. So that is what I mean by saying that certain Sanskrit words with no equivalent, we ought to just protect them and use those words, and that way we don't get digested into the belly of the West.
Interesting. You agree with this, Dr. Sokla? Yeah,
Huh?
That's very interesting.
So I have put only 25 examples or so. Maybe, we have to take that chapter 5, which is what this is, turn that into a bigger volume, and look at Sanskrit words that have been commonly translated and why that translation is not good enough.
क्या उसमें problem है translation में? I think this is a good project.
It is a good project. It's a very good project. Because हमारा जो word होता है, उसके कई meanings होते हैं. उसका एक spectrum of meanings होता है. Like dharma also got a lot of meanings. तो उसको collapse करके आप एक word में लगा दें.
Definition के चक्कर में पड़ जाते हैं.
And this idea of critical indication. Now, it's a Western idea because they want order. So they want homogeneity, not too much complexity. So वो बाइबल की एक critical edition बनाई थी Emperor Constantine ने. उसके पहले there were a lot of these groups with different ideas of what Jesus said, what he means. But the scholar of early Christianity at Princeton University, Elaine Pagels, he's considered the foremost scholar. She'll tell you that until Emperor Constantine decided कि एक standard होनी चाहिए, सबके लिए वही होनी चाहिए. Actually, there was a very big diversity of Christianity. It was very much like a Hindu tradition. There were a lot of people going, teaching their own thing, their own anubhav, experience of Jesus and all that. So there was room for many ideas. There's no one fixed idea. This collapsing into critical edition started
is a big problem.
Big problem. अब देखिए,
Interesting point.
this is the problem which is now Indians have introduced this idea to make critical editions of Hinduism, and hence the attack on A.K. Ramanujan. कि एक ही हो सकता है. The moment you make a critical edition of Ramayana, it is not itihas, it has become like literal history. So then what about the Ramayana they do in Cambodia? What about the Ramayana they do here, there? Are you going to deny them? So why are you doing that? Thailand में रामायण सब जगह है. ये डांस करते हैं, पैलेसेस में हैं. पर एक बहुत अंतर है, वेरी इंटरेस्टिंग पॉइंट. उनका जो बहुत अच्छे टेम्पल्स हैं, बुद्धिस्ट टेम्पल्स हैं, तो बाहर एक खड़ा है बहुत टफ गाय, तो वो गाइड बोलता है कि ये रावणा है. तो सो आई आस्क्ड, ये रावणा है, व्हाई इज ही स्टैंडिंग हियर? तो ही सेज रावणा इज ग्रेट. सो आई सेड, व्हाई इज रावणा ग्रेट? So they tell me the whole story of Ramayana, but then how they've incorporated him into Buddhism is ki after Ravan dies, he regrets what he has done. Okay. And he says, I want to come back and serve Ram in his next life. So Ram in his next life becomes Buddha, and Ravan becomes his servant protecting him. This is interesting, interesting adaptation. So in front of the Buddhist temple, under Buddha hai, guardian outside is Ravana. And now Ravana has become a good guy. Now you can't deny that. This is the beauty of our Sanskriti. How, if you were to say कि ये violation है, that is
critical edition का violation.
Critical edition violation हो गया. That critical edition is a Western concept.
That's a good idea.
It comes from order. It comes from homogeneity. It comes from the sense of historicity.
Historicism and yeah. Amrinder has a question. Then we will quickly come to, and I'll come to you last.
The mutual respect. Indian value is mutual respect. Respect can be earned. It can't be learned. So one thing is this, how you explain this, and when we see the Western world from Indian perspective, Indian values, how will you interpret the West?
I would interpret that is there are 4 big differences I mentioned in this book. और हर एक difference का एक chapter है. And the idea is, in each difference, I'm saying कि this is the Indian side, how it is, this is the Western side, and it is my Purva Paksha of the West. So I am looking at the West from the Indian eyes, in that point of view. So for instance, looking at itihas, from the itihas point of view, history seems very boring, dull, linear, and something happens unique, absolute, kabhi repeat nahi hoga, usko aap adapt nahi kar sakte. You're stuck. You're stuck with something in a box, and you're going to have violence, and you're going to have conflicts. So isi tarah se, I'm taking various ideas in this book and showing the Indian point of view.
So can we say that the time has come when we have to write Westology, that like it's Indology?
Yeah. I in fact used the word Westology 20 years ago. I wanted to start Institute of Westology. I proposed it. I introduced this term. I wrote to many people. यहाँ से मेरे को लोगों ने कहा ये वो क्या बोल रहा है, like that. Actually, I went to Westerners only, and I said, if the West understands how others see the West, it will be good. It will be good. Lot of liberal Westerners thought, ठीक है, आप करिए, we will join you. India if we were to start Institute of Westology, वहाँ पर हैं area studies, so they have South Asia, they have East Asia, Middle East, through the Western lens. We do not have, not only we do not have a very large scale study of others, we do not even have South Asian studies in India. South Asian. So South Asian studies का किसी ने expert बनना है, तो उसको हार्वर्ड जाना पड़ेगा, शिकागो जाना पड़ेगा, कोलंबिया जाना पड़ेगा, तो फिर वो वहाँ से आएगा तो वो कहेंगे ये साउथ एशिया का एक्सपर्ट है. This is the problem. I was in a meeting when there was a discussion going on among some people कि तिब्बतन को इंडिक लैंग्वेजेस में गिनना है कि किस में गिनना है, कैसे करना है. And a few people after a conversation said that maybe we should call University of Chicago and find out.
That's
Yeah,
very
this is how it be.
funny. Yeah, I know. I know that's true. Can I switch over to Ruchi? A quick question.
As I told you that I'm working on natural resources, so basically we find that there is very different understanding about natural resources in West and India. How we look at it as a commodity, like say I'm working on water, so the bottle drinking water kind of thing in West is very common, but still Indians are taking time to like. So from there I relate it to religion, that how Hinduism is always stressed upon in most of the movements. Basically I'm looking at two movements. So how they are using religion as a means to use, like say, to make people aware, especially like I'm working on Thakur and Malhotra. They are using Hinduism as a means to say that tree and rivers, they all are like
Sacred.
God, they all are sacred.
Mike.
So how will you like respond to that? Do you think that religion may play a very important role in politics of natural resources?
See, देखिए, जब आप religion कहते हैं, I have problem. But if you say कि हमारे धर्म में नेचर को प्रकृति मानकर, उसको शक्ति मानकर, उसको रिस्पेक्ट दिया गया है, नेचर के भी राइट्स हैं, वेस्ट के में ह्यूमन राइट्स हैं, हमारे में सिर्फ एनिमल राइट्स भी नहीं है, बट ट्रीज हैव राइट्स, रिवर्स हैव राइट्स, अर्थ हैज राइट्स, द कॉस्मोस हैज राइट्स, दिस इज द धर्म. तो उनका रिलीजन में बाकी चीज़ों के राइट्स नहीं हैं. गॉड मेड द वर्ल्ड फॉर मैन्स कंजम्पशन, दैट इज हाउ इट इज इन द रिलीजन. बट हियर गॉड डिड नॉट मेक द वर्ल्ड फॉर मैन टू एक्सप्लॉयट एंड कंज्यूम. वहाँ पर जो एनवायरमेंटलिस्ट मूवमेंट है, इट इज़ नॉट बिकॉज एनवायरमेंटल का ही राइट है, बट वी में रन आउट ऑफ ऑयल. हाँ, वी में रन आउट ऑफ ऑयल, वो अपनी सेल्फिश बात है. इट इज़ कि आप पोल्यूट करेंगे तो हमारे रिवर में फिश नहीं होगी, तो हमारी फिशिंग इंडस्ट्री का नुकसान हो जाएगा. सो इट इज़ जो एनवायरमेंटलिस्ट मूवमेंट है, इट इज़ ह्यूमन सेंट्रिक, इट इज़ नॉट नेचर सेंट्रिक. सो दिस इज़ वेयर द धर्म इज़ वेरी डिफरेंट. सो यूज ऑफ धर्म, इफ इट इज़ सक्सेसफुल, इट शोज कि लोगों में अभी भी है, वो
अभी भी है, बिल्कुल.
they have this idea. You know, the lot of problems we have in our country is because we've translated dharma as religion. So in the West there was religion because it is historical centric, history में है, conflict ridden है, वो उसमें श्रुति और स्मृति को मिला दिया गया है, अलग नहीं रखा. हमारी स्मृति is changeable. So because स्मृति is changeable, we never had conflict with science. क्योंकि साइंस जब नई चीज़ निकालती है वो स्मृति है, तो वो नई स्मृति निकाल दी किसी ने. अब आइंस्टाइन ने स्मृति निकाल दी, न्यूटन ने निकाल दी, तो क्या बड़ी बात है. तो वहाँ पर क्योंकि स्मृति को अलग नहीं रखा, सबको इकट्ठा एक किताब में डाल दिया, और एक किताब फ्रीज हो गई, तो उसके मतलब कुछ भी आप निकालेंगे जो अलग है, तो वो उस पर लड़ाई होगी हमारी, क्योंकि आप हमारे बुक को क्रिटिकल एडिशन बना दी, उन्होंने स्मृति की बना दी. सो पॉइंट, दिस इज अ वेरी सीरियस पॉइंट. सो व्हेन वी ट्रांसलेट धर्म एज योग, आई मीन धर्म एज रिलीजन, सो उन्होंने रिलीजन का ये जो प्रॉब्लम्स थे अगेंस्ट साइंस, अगेंस्ट ईच अदर, उनको सॉल्व करने के लिए सेक्युलरिज्म निकाली. सेक्युलरिज्म वाज ए गुड सोल्यूशन फॉर ए वेस्टर्न प्रॉब्लम, बट वी डिड नॉट हैव दैट प्रॉब्लम because the dharma did not have these conflicts, because dharma could accommodate that there is something, we have something called jati dharma. If you have jati dharma, it means आपकी जाति में आपका जाति धर्म है, तो अब वो अलग है आपके लिए.
सब जीव धर्म है, जाति धर्म है, प्रोफेशन का धर्म है,
प्रोफेशन का धर्म है. जानवर अपना जानवर, टाइगर इज नॉन वेज, इज नॉट डूइंग एनीथिंग रॉन्ग, बिकॉज वो टाइगर का धर्म है, वो खाएगा, गोट को खाएगा.
फेमस कहानी है चीटी का धर्म है,
चीटी का धर्म है. सो धर्म इज अ वेरी वेरी profound concept we must understand, and we should not replace it with religion. So इसमें हमने try to explain किया है सापेक्ष धर्म, मतलब कि धर्म where there is universe, there is pluralism. तो प्लूरलिज्म के सब धर्म को कैसे कोएग्जिस्ट करना है ओपन आर्किटेक्चर में, एज कॉन्ट्रास्ट आई हैव कंपेयर्ड दैट विद सेक्युलरिज्म. ये पॉइंट इंडिया में बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट डिबेट की है कि इज सेक्युलरिज्म ए गुड मॉडल फॉर ए सोसाइटी ऑफ धर्म एज अपोज टू सापेक्ष धर्म.
Professor Pandey.
Yes, quite a few points interestingly. The one that was raised about mutual respect and untranslatability, including dharma, it seems to me that there is some kind of a basic difference in the way we see what human beings are, that is how we understand human being, human life, compared to the way the Westerns see
Yes,
it.
yes.
And that is the difference of spirituality. That
Yes.
is, the essence of man is not that he is rational, that he can think, therefore he exists, but the fact that that the man is a spirit. When so you don't really have to teach an Indian basically to be able to respect somebody, because once you accept the fact that we are spiritual, that means we are all equal, no matter what religion you follow,
yes.
what faith you have.
Yes.
This is something deeply ingrained
Yeah.
into the very understanding of ourselves as spiritual beings.
बहुत बढ़िया बात है.
Anybody who is a man, human being,
बिल्कुल.
has to be respected.
बिल्कुल ठीक.
And so that's what you do when you say Namate is Te is the third person to the Atman.
Yes.
The Naman,
Yes.
Naman is to the Atman.
And you know, Atman, when we say Vasudeva Kutumbakam,
Yeah.
so that includes animals, it includes plants also.
Ji.
It includes the whole living,
Exactly.
everybody.
Vasudha,
So,
Vasudha itself,
so
the earth.
what happens is that we have words, vocabulary, which is at the level of spirituality.
It
That
can't
is-
be translated.
It cannot, because the words in English
Yes.
are at the rational level.
You got it.
You
Yes.
see?
Very
So
interesting.
that cannot be.
बिल्कुल ठीक
That's
है.
why that, and I think they will stay as long as our understanding of what human life is and
Yes.
what human beings are
Yes.
remains
Yes.
intact.
Yes.
That
So
is
preserving these
spirituality.
words, I think, is a very important project.
Yes.
और ये स्टार्ट किया जाए 50 वर्ड से या 100 वर्ड से, वो ऐसे वर्ड्स हैं जो अनेक हैं और उनका इंग्लिश में कोई इक्विवेलेंट नहीं है और कॉमनली डिस्टॉर्ट हो रहे हैं वो वर्ड्स. तो उनका एक प्रोजेक्ट होना चाहिए कि लोगों, हर एक के लिए हर एक वर्ड का कुछ 5-10 पेजेस का एक छोटा छोटा डिस्क्रिप्शन होना चाहिए. टू
So that can be used in
it
the
can be
same way.
used, it can be used, and you can use that word in talking English also.
Yeah,
But you
same.
will use that word
Yeah.
rather than the other word, and with the confidence कि मैं देखो धर्म से की बात करूँगा, आप religion की तो आपकी बात है, मैं धर्म के बारे में बात करता हूँ.
That's
मेरे को
true.
पता है इसके बारे में क्या है.
Let me bring in something else in this. Roy Bhaskar, I mentioned you about that. Roy Bhaskar wrote a book, which is his 7th or 8th book, Odyssey of Soul from East to West. And in that book, he has used around 10 concepts without giving an English parallel to that. And that book created a huge problem in the West.
Yeah.
To him, I mean, Roy Bhaskar's 7 books have created something called critical realist movement. And the movement itself now says that the movement would like to disown the 8th book. So Roy said that, well, the 8th book is a logical conclusion of my 7th.
See, he's a very clever fellow. He brought all these people together. They
Yeah.
didn't realize कि अब हमको there will be a final hit.
That's right.
And now I've got everybody in one room, so now I'm going to tell you the final.
But unfortunately, what happened, then he dropped the project because it was such a protest in the West that there was a big problem.
Now I'll tell you why this is a good timing
Yeah.
to try something. America में 1960s में there was a crisis of myth, and so they were looking at India for answers, philosophical
Okay.
answers.
Okay.
They are going through another crisis of myth today.
Oh.
Yeah, because of all the problems you know, कि हमारी इकोनॉमी डाउन हो गया है, क्या डेट हो गया है, चाइना आ गया है, ये अनएम्प्लॉयमेंट होगी इतने परसेंट, ये वो. So there is lack of there's sudden devastation of self confidence among Americans. कि my kids who are in their 20s, उनके जितने भी friends हैं, they're all wondering कि कोई कह रहा है इंडिया चले जाएं, चाइना चले जाएंगे, क्या करेंगे.
That's
ऐसे
very
वैसे.
interesting.
Yeah, and so in the 60s ये हुआ था. हमने स्टडी किया बहुत और एक और पुस्तक निकालेंगे on the India's role in the 60s. Revival of the American myth. पुरानी myth उनकी है about who they are, very exceptional people. वो myth खराब होगी because of Vietnam war, अब Iraq war है. तो Vietnam war में बुरी, it was bad. Many other things, Nixon scandal, Watergate, ये वो ऐसे काफी problem थे. Then this civil liberties, blacks wanting equal rights, coup riots, where are demonstrations. All these things happened. Kennedy getting assassinated, Martin Luther King, ये वो. So ये crisis of myth हो गया था, national ethos of who we are as a people. So India became a very popular source of inspiration. A lot of gurus made their became big shots, became big money fellows also. Because they thought कि अब ये लोग हमारे पास आ रहे हैं तो उनको we are the ones who can tell them.
That's how they became very rich.
They became very rich and became like multinationals, and a lot of them like that. That's another story I'm also writing on. What happened to the gurus? Where are they now? उनके जो empires हैं, they're all taken over here. They कुछ क्या, why it happened? I'm writing on that.
Mahesh Yogi.
The rise and fall of the Indian gurus in the West. I'm writing a book on that. So now is another crisis of myth, and they are again interested in understanding. So we have to introduce this time not through the guru type people, but more authentic.
Okay.
This is a time to introduce in your departments, Indian ideas in a very authentic way, and say भी ये environmentalism में हमारी ये philosophy है, ये हमारे social theory में ये ideas हैं, why and how we handle more complexity, how we can respect, mutual respect, क्या philosophy है इसके अंदर. The West is sitting as an audience.
Very interesting. So it seems that my paper that I want to introduce on Indian intellectual tradition is very timely.
It is very timely.
But I want you to devote another 2-3 minutes at least on your idea of the turning point, which unfortunately I could not take up earlier.
The U-turn.
U-turn, yeah. Right.
U-turn theory is my project, जो next book निकलेगी. U-turn theory is कि 60s में कितने लोग आए और उन्होंने काफ़ी कुछ हिंदू से, बुद्धिस्ट से सीखा, और फिर उन्होंने उस इंडियन सोर्सेज को डिसोन करके, लाइक दीपक चोपड़ा से ये दैट काइंड ऑफ आइडिया कि ये सब जेनेरिक है, सब जगह मिलता है. देन दे ब्रॉट इट बैक इनटू क्रिश्चियनिटी कि ये क्रिश्चियनिटी की बात है, एंड देन दे स्टार्टेड डिसोनिंग द इंडियन सोर्स in the sense of disliking it, rejecting it very positively. So this has happened in Ayurveda. This has happened where the person first studies, then he tries to say कि ये ग्रीक ने भी निकाला था, ये तो वहाँ भी था, ये जड़ी बूटी ये मेक्सिको भी मिलती है, चाहे मिले ना मिले, और फिर हमारे भी वहाँ बाइबल में ये लिखा हुआ था. Then ultimately he'll try to get a patent and he'll try to claim ownership कि हमने निकाली है. So for example, जो holistic healing कहते हैं, इंडिया ने बहुत कंट्रीब्यूट किया इन द 60s. बहुत जो लोग आए थे इंडिया से सीखे थे. अब मैसाचुसेट्स में मेडिकल कोर्स में होलिस्टिक हीलिंग का एक इलेक्टिव सब्जेक्ट है, तो उसमें जो सिलेबस है और जो किताब प्रिस्क्राइब किया हिस्ट्री ऑफ होलिस्टिक हीलिंग, उसमें एक भी इंडियन सोर्स का नाम नहीं है. सब वेस्टर्न जो सीख रहे थे, जो इंडियंस से सीख के आए थे, दे आर लिस्टेड एज द पायनियर्स. सो इसको हम यू टर्न बोलते हैं. सो आई हैव बीन स्टडीइंग कि यू टर्न क्यों होता है. अब ये यू टर्न कई लोगों को हुआ. T.S. Eliot was studying Sanskrit, and some of his greatest poems, The Wasteland, the 4 quartets, actually he's translating from the Gita. He's translating from Gita, and passages he's translating. But at one point he writes that this is so profound that all Western philosophy is like schoolboys. He was a quote like that. I've given in the Newton. Yeah. So then the point is he says, for me to go deeper into this, I'll have to stop being a Westerner. Then the moment I can give up my Westerner identity, I can go deep into this. But then I have to cut off from relatives, friends, He even considered moving to India, living in India, T.S. Eliot. And then he has to, it's crossroads, that is his dilemma. And he decides, no, I can't give up all this. So then he has to, that is his U-turn moment. Then he has to he goes very publicly at Harvard Square and gets baptized again as a Christian. Later in life, one more time. मतलब as if like एक और गंगा का स्नान करना पड़ेगा to clean up all the things I may have picked up from those people. So this is the U-turn moment that I'm studying in many Westerners जो पहले इंडियन कल्चर को रिस्पेक्ट करते हैं, फिर अपनाते हैं, फिर अपने आप को क्लेम करते हैं हम ही पायनियर हैं, हमारी है, फिर इंडिया को रिजेक्ट कर देते हैं.
But you are also taking U-turn.
I am taking a reverse U-turn. हम भी U-turn करते हैं. Because I am following your problem. You said कैसे solve करना है कि हमको following the rules, which is the dominant rules, we have to win because practically we need resources and we have to keep alive our own culture. तो दोनों को कैसे करना है. So I have done my U-turn. कि जो हमको चाहिए था वहाँ से हमने ले लिया. अब हम उसको इंडियनाइज कैसे कर सकते हैं एंड हाउ कैन आई फाइंड सिमिलर रिसोर्सेज विच आर मोर इंडिया फ्रेंडली.
That's interesting. I think the core ideas that came up in this discussion, one, that there's a need to take cognizance of greatness of the culture. Any culture should be conscious of itself.
Yes.
So the self-consciousness of the culture is very important. Otherwise, it will be digested without the presence of any DNA, as you
Yes.
put it. And I think during the freedom struggle, probably a lot of leaders realized that, and they asserted their own cultural identity. The second point is that what is happening in the West at the moment, that they are resolving their crisis in that they might digest a lot of cultures, so that they can gain that strength. I remember your other discussion where you say that by digesting other cultures, they get that strength to survive.
Right.
So that's what is happening. But simultaneously, probably what is also happening is there is a crisis of myth, and there's a moment when we should try to assert our cultural identity
Yes.
in a way that we should not be digested.
Will not be digested, and one of the ways is through certain non-translatable words. We say कि इसका आप जो भी निकालेंगे equivalent वो गलती होगा.
That's a strategy. Yeah.
That as a strategy.
So that they can't take U-turn and tell
Yeah.
you later on that, well, this is our resources
Yeah.
that we have used.
उसको
That's
उसको
interesting,
उसको
yeah.
हमने term इस book में नहीं निकाला, next book में निकालेंगे. I'm calling it the जैसे fisherman hook होता है. वो कहता है कि ये खा लेगा तो fish खा लेगा तो पकड़ा जाएगा. So it is like that. उसको trap करने के लिए. मतलब these words जब वो खा लेंगे वो digest करने की कोशिश करेंगे. जितना deep digest करेंगे हमारा जो word है वैसा ही रहेगा. It will be very good for us.
So that the DNA is always present. So
DNA
tomorrow if
is
somebody wants to locate that, they can easily locate.
You can look at the history of a word. अब देखो योग को कितना उन्होंने distort कर दिया, dilute कर दिया. But yog word did not get replaced by exercise, gymnastics,
Yeah,
ये वो.
that's true.
Because
That's a good example.
Max Miller did not translate Yoga Sutra, thankfully. Otherwise, he would have come up with some word which would have replaced the word yoga. So चाहे जो मर्जी कर लें, expert can go and say आप योग सीख रहे हैं तो मैं योग सूत्र बता दूंगा आपको. So they cannot deny that.
They call it power yoga. They
Yeah,
a lot of
so I've started 10 years ago encouraging many yoga teachers, advanced yoga teachers, learn Patanjali Yoga Sutra and teach your class. So there is a trend now to learn Yoga Sutra of Patanjali. So this is non-digestible. चाहे वो जितना भी कोशिश कर लें, because the word is ours.
That is a good example of how we can fight this.
Resist the digestion.
Very nice. Thank you very much, Professor Malhotra and Professor Pandey, Dr. Shukla, and everybody. Thanks to the viewers also. I think it was a very lively discussion. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Pleasure.